with all due respect.
All right, guys, with all due respect, we're here live. This is going to be part of the State of Youth Sports series. And we have Dr. Chris Bjork from Vassar. The book is called More Than Just a Game: How the Youth Sports Industry is Changing the Way We Parent and What to Do About It. And give a little background about this book. I was searching through Amazon to find a different book, came across your book, read the bio. One chapter in, Chris, I felt like this is something that I sent to my athletic director and I said, I feel like this should be mandatory reading for every coach and parent that comes through our school. And one of the things I loved the most about starting, and we talked a little bit before this, an unbiased look at youth sports. When most books like this, they bash parents, they'll bash coaches, they'll bash kids. Oh, this generation just doesn't know what hard work is, right? And I didn't want to hear that. I wanted an open mind look at where we're at currently with youth sports, what led to it, what information can parents get. And this seemed to be the book. And reaching out to you, I was like, I'm going to reach out to this guy. And you hit me right back. I was very pleasantly surprised. You're like, yeah, email me and I'd love to talk more. So I really just want to start by thanking you for coming on and taking your time. Can you give us a little bit of idea of the background that even led to you saying, I think we need to write this book. I think I want to write this book and we're going to do it. Just what led to even writing this book?
Right. So I can remember very clearly the conversation I had with my co-author Bill Hoynes that led to this project. And that was both of us had kids who were athletes. We had both been coaches, and we were just walking to our cars one day and commiserating that it was so difficult to get accurate information about what the youth sports industry was like these days and how it affected families. And so we decided that we wanted to provide a balanced perspective, and we really wanted to help people like ourselves. We had both been athletes. We had PhDs, we were so sucked up in the system that we had trouble figuring out how to negotiate all the expectations and how to make it work for kids. And so we spent 2 years following a handful of travel teams. We went to their practices and games and tournaments. We talked to parents and kids, coaches, refs, all of that. And then we added to that a survey of about 500 parents, and we interviewed parents and coaches all over the country. And the goal was to help them make sensible decisions for their kids that would help them in the long term, because it's so hard to do that these days if you're just reading the newspaper or watching YouTube or following Facebook feeds.
Yeah, that makes sense because here we are. You're a PhD in education, right? And I believe the other author is it William Hoynes? Is it Hoynes?
Yep.
PhD in sociology, right? And I think people sometimes think that those guys got it all figured out, right? Right? And here you are going like, man, this is what I do for a living. A vast experience in education, a sociologist, and even you get confused.
Well, I think one reason is that the youth sports industry when we were growing up looks almost nothing like it does today. When we were in high school, or when we were even younger than that, you signed up for a little league team, you played for the local AYSA program, and then you played for your high school team, and that was it. And the vast majority of athletes focused on those activities. But now it's become such big business that there's pressure on kids and on their parents to start specializing and joining these really intense programs when they're 7, 8, and 9 years old. And so when they think back to what they experience, it doesn't apply to what their kids are going through at all.
Do you feel like that is the biggest shift you've seen? Is
Absolutely.
it? is that shift right there.
Yeah.
That's
And that shift affects them on a couple of levels. One is the pressure placed on kids and families because, um, at 8 years old, most young athletes aren't in a position to make decisions that will affect the next 10 years of their lives. And the parents, like I said, don't really have a foundation of knowledge to make good decisions. And the second part is it's gotten to be big business and it's really expensive. So in the book, we catalog like all the different activities that parents are encouraged to pay for: private lessons, specialized training, summer showcase tournaments, and all the costs that go along with these travel teams. And so they invest a lot of money in their kids' sports careers starting when they're very young. And because they've invested so much money, and I would add time, they expect a payoff down the line.
wow. Yeah. I have heard in my experience, um, talking with parents of kids who will come to me and they say, my kid played travel softball, travel sports up until 15. We've invested all this time and now they come to me and they don't want to play. They want to play another sport. And you hear this from the parent. They say, but we've just invested so much money and time. I hate to see him quit. I've never thought about that until you just said that right now. They're looking at the time they've invested.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's become a whole family enterprise. Like I said, when we were kids, our parents dropped it. Well, they didn't even drop us off at practice. We just rode our bikes down to the field at the end of the block, played with our friends, and then went to 7-Eleven or something after, and that was it. My parents, maybe they'd show up for games every now and then. That was kind of it. But now, go to any, here's an interesting exercise. Go to a 7 or 8 year old soccer practice. And I will be surprised if you don't see the field lined with all the parents who are there from start to finish, yelling at their kids, involved in it. And then as they get older, the demands get rapidly greater. So by the time they're 10 and 11, may be driving them to tournaments in different states. They may be taking them to summer showcases in the summer. And all of this is very expensive.
I have an 8-year old, and when I drop him off at practices, I try to sit in the car. Um, and I will look up and I'll see the group of dads over here, the group of moms over here. I sit in the car because one, under my watchful eye, I don't know if my kid will have fun. He'll always be looking at me. He'll always be looking at me because the son wants approval, right? It's very important for my son for me to be coached by somebody else. I also don't want to put the pressure. It'd be like me sitting over his shoulder when he's taking a math test.
Right.
I don't want to have that pressure. I want to have did you have fun?
Yeah.
Did you have fun with your friends? But you see the parents um, lined up, and I don't know if that's good or bad. One thing I love about your book is you never really placed a judgment, really. Um, I just know that the last thing my kid needs is added stress on an 8-year-old when he's supposed to have fun and play with his friends, and it's a game.
Yeah. And getting back to the idea of, parents making decisions and thinking once they have skin in the game that there has to be a payoff. One really interesting finding that we noticed was that parents, almost all the parents we interviewed and observed, do begin this whole process with the goal of their kid having fun and life skills. So a lot of times when we ask them, what do you hope your kid gets out of it? They rarely said a college scholarship or, I want them to make it to the MBA or WNBA. It was usually life skills, the ability to work with other kids, persistence, teamwork, all of that. But those goals shift pretty quickly and they kind of lose sight of them once they start devoting so much time to these activities and they struggle. So they would say to us, well, what we care most about is my kid having fun. But then when they had to make decisions, it was really hard to stay focused on the fun aspect of it because everything had shifted so quickly that it became more, how can I set my kid up to get the attention of a college scout? Or how can I make sure that they're going to make it to this elite pay-to-play program. And they weren't even always aware of this duality in what they were saying. They would, claim that they want what's best for their kids, but they felt pressure too, and so their goals somehow got warped.
Gray has an experience playing soccer as a kid. We've talked about this, where and Gray, you can chime in. And
Yeah.
she played high level youth soccer, but as soon as they realized she also had an interest in other sports and didn't want to play college soccer, they kind of forced you out of the program. Is that
Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah. I played for a club locally here in South Carolina, and I was always a multi-sport athlete. Like I loved soccer. It was always my first love, but I loved playing year-round sports and just doing something else. And when I got to high school, I ended up really finding a love for lacrosse. And so I was like, I'll play high school lacrosse in the spring, and I'll play soccer for my club in the fall. And it was either my sophomore or junior year, and my coach had called me and was like, there's not a spot for you on the team anymore. Um, and so I completely understand the time, the energy, the money aspect spent into a singular club. Like I've told Josh before, I don't even want to ask my parents how much money they spent on this particular club, taking me to travel, weekends twice a month, three times a month, a lot of the time. So I always think this conversation is very interesting because it makes me reflect a lot on, my personal experience with
I think that's
youth
a great
sports.
example because it also raises this point of what happens when a kid makes a decision when they're 8, and
Hmm.
then when they get a little older, either their goals change, their interest shift, or they get injured or the coach
Hmm.
cuts them. Then if their identity is so tied to this one sport, how do they adjust? And there's,
Hmm.
a lot of evidence suggesting that there can be all sorts of mental health issues, and also just they lose their sense of identity because once they stop playing soccer, what do they have left? And that's why we really encourage parents to try and make it possible for their kids to engage in multiple sports, multiple activities as long as possible.
Gray's 28, I'm 48.
29. I just turned
29,
29.
just turned 29, I'm 48. So now we're talking about 13 years ago.
Yeah,
I don't even want to look at 33 years ago, right?
just the difference. It is really incredible for me to hear, and I think it helps me with, the relationship with my parents and in the future relationship I'll have with my children, hear how it's changed because I never really took into account before he had these conversations that, somebody like my dad, who was also a multi-sport athlete, he just played for school.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was little league
Yeah.
and things like that, but he was able in college to play two different sports.
Yeah.
And for me now, I was like, that could never be a reality, really. I mean, you practice year round. I would start lacrosse practice in high school. The season started in February. We'd start practicing in August.
Yeah.
So it's just a very different world.
It was really interesting to us because we also interviewed coaches and athletic directors, and we were surprised to hear that they encourage kids to play multiple sports for as long as possible. One reason is it just helps them develop different skill sets and muscles. If
Hmm.
you're playing, especially the best example of this is baseball. If you're a pitcher who's pitching, hundreds of pitches a game, throughout the year, there's a good chance you'll have a physical injury, but also the chances of burnout are much greater. And so the college coaches we talked to really valued athletes who had done many different things and also maintain an enthusiasm for their
Mhm.
sport, which is hard to do sometimes when there's so much pressure placed on you starting at a young age.
Right.
Do
And
you think
specialize in that young age.
Right.
you think most parents realize how big the business has become and
No,
how big the
and
industry is?
that was one of the reasons we decided to write the book is when you start out, you have no sense of this. The average parent is just thinking, what can my 7-year-old son or daughter do to stay busy and make friends? And so those bigger issues aren't even on their plate. But as I mentioned, nowadays, before they finish elementary school, they're probably going to get pressure to specialize, to devote as much attention and time as possible to a single activity. And that can throw them all off balance because they don't have that broader perspective.
Did you do you have like a, I don't know, did you guys take statistics from coaches from like a rec program versus like a specialized program, like something like an elite program? Or have you guys done the research between the two? Because I feel like the difference would be coaches in a rec program are probably like, oh yeah, go play your multiple sports. You know, this is fun for us, versus the elite coaches would be like, no, you need to be here all of the time.
Absolutely. And just to kind of tie this to the development of the whole industry, what we found when we did, look at the history is that until the 80s and 90s, most sports activities were provided by local youth rec programs.
Right.
Then there were cuts to all those programs, and sports entrepreneurs took advantage of that and created all these programs that parents had to pay for. And so those programs still exist, but they're harder to find, and they're also harder to find in rural areas or low-income areas. And so a lot of those kids don't have those options. And the other thing that I think is really sad is that there's this hierarchy is developed where travel clubs, pay-to-play clubs are seen as more desirable. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're playing Little League, that's something that you may do for a little bit, but if you have any talent, you will abandon that. So in our area, Little League is struggling to survive. When
Mhm.
my
Yeah.
kid, 15 years ago, when my kids were playing Little League, there were, I think, 10 teams in their age division in our town. Now there's one league for 3 towns that has 2 clubs. And I was out there watching opening day ceremonies recently, and the entire league, parents, athletes, coaches, not parents, athletes, coaches, ref, could fit on the infield. So
Mhm.
these low pressure leagues are struggling to compete. But I would add that even though that's happening, I'm really sorry that it has developed that way. It is possible for parents to find options that are less pressure within the youth sports industry.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's this whole hierarchy, and that's another thing I think parents don't understand is that they have options. They can um, sign up for clubs that will give their kids really high quality coaching without requiring them to play 4 days a week, 11 months a year.
Mhm.
That's what I was going to add too. I think there is such a stigma. I remember like when I did get cut from the elite team that I was playing with, I almost felt shameful to go to the
Yeah,
rec program. And I had way more fun at the rec program. It was much more lighthearted. We were actually really, really good.
Yeah.
But it's so true that there is a stigma that's like, oh, you're not good enough to play at this elite level, so you're gonna go just play rec for fun.
right.
How do you think we break that?
Well, I think so. In our book, we tried to think. We thought a lot about what advice we could give parents, and the industry is not going to change. I mean,
Mhm.
it's continuing to expand. So now the youth sports industry is larger than the NFL. To put this in perspective, and private equity has started to eye youth sports as an area of profit, and so it's going to keep growing. And our view is that the best thing parents can do is just focus on their individual kid and what makes them happy and how to structure their daily lives so that they don't experience that pressure, and to try and get involved in local rec leagues or even lower stress travel teams so that their kids will have options and that they don't succumb to that pressure to go all in before the kids are ready for it.
Yeah, there's a difference between I believe we said this in the book. Some kind of like there's a difference between healthy support and harmful pressure,
Right.
right? You said in the book too something that really hit home to me. When I was a kid playing sports, if a kid played on a travel team or an elite team, it was the one kid on the team that was way better than everybody else, and everybody knew it. And almost like the coaches in the rec league were like, "You, you know, you're hitting 3 home runs a game and scoring 8 goals a game. Maybe go play up here where it's more competitive, right?"
Mhm.
Um, it was the kid that's like, "Oh man, he must be amazing. He's probably going to get drafted in MLB baseball because he's." Now I feel like a checkbook gets you on the team.
Yeah, it's very political.
And one thing you brought up, I really want to focus on. I've experienced this with kids, and it's really hard to watch. We see it in the NFL, we see it in pro sports. I've seen it as early as kids in high school. They'll work so hard, and at the end of their senior year, there's no opportunities for them to play anymore. And when you ask the kid, "Hey, man, tell me about yourself," they'll say, "Well, I'm a baseball player." And their identity gets wrapped up in, um, "I'm a baseball player."
Yeah.
Or you see these kids working really hard for that football scholarship, and maybe they're just not big enough. Maybe, there's a genetic blessing to that I tell people that we can't recreate the genetic blessing that some people have. And
Yeah.
there's kids I'm like, I'm really concerned if they don't go on to play high school and college. Where's their identity? Who
No.
do they see themselves at?
Right.
And I don't know if parents see that as they start shaping their kids and their lives.
Yeah,
One thing
that
that also struck us was we're talking about youth sports, but the issues that we're discussing aren't limited to sports. They're kind of indicative of changes in parenting, no matter what the kids are interested. There's this pressure to make your kid exceptional, whether it's football or ice skating or um, singing or ballet. There's just been a real shift in our society to expecting parents to do whatever they can to make their kids rise to the very, very top rather than to do what's best for them in the long run.
In your experience as an educator, do you even see that even with education and grades?
Absolutely. So these issues pervade almost everything that has to do with kids these days. And if you think about how schools are structured, it's shifted, since the early 2000s from an emphasis on process to outcomes and scores on tests. And when I go and, visit schools, so much is driven by just getting kids ready to do well on these high stakes tests. And I think that's analogous to sports, where it's not, what do you get from the experience? How are you going to work with others? What's going to make you a better person, to performing in a very narrow way.
Yeah, I've heard somebody said something recently, or I read it somewhere that they said the strive for the high SAT score and the 4.0 is almost take away kids' curiosity to learn.
Exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's like I love to learn, and I think just having that SAT prep was a reason I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't want to take the test.
Yeah.
I don't care what I get on the test. I
Well,
mean, you
plus
should
you
care,
need
but
sports, right?
yeah,
Plus you
yeah.
need
But
sports.
that's kind of what I was going to tie into is, as we think about starting to go to college and thinking about the pressures of playing your sport, and then your kid decides that they don't want to play, it's like, what have you taught them to stay healthy in college? Because my freshman year, when I got to college, I lost that. I
Yeah.
got so out of my routine because I just couldn't connect how to stay healthy with not playing a sport.
Right.
I didn't know how to do it, you
Right.
know? So I think, that's even a huge thing to think about as you guys were talking of, not just saying your sport is the only way that you can exercise, the only way, your only purpose, your only role that you should play in your nutrition. You can do stuff outside of your sport to stay
And
healthy.
we've been talking from the perspective of coaches and parents, but there's a lot of evidence from physicians and psychologists that support what we're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Almost every study I've read on sports specialization written by a doctor or a medical association strongly recommends delaying specialization until kids are in middle school at the earliest, because of the potential of injury and because of the mental health implications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
y- Um, you, I kind of tie that a little bit to the rise of the industry. And now you meet these people and you say, "What do you do for a living?" They're like, "Well, I run a sports club." A
Right.
youth
Mhm.
sports club. And like, wow, I never even knew that existed. I never knew somebody did that. So I think there's some fight to keep the parent dollar inside my club, because if I say, "Hey, go play lacrosse, go play soccer, go do something else, go take gymnastics," Well, now the dollar spent goes outside of my club, goes somewhere else, and now my business won't be as successful,
Absolutely. Right.
right?
So these pay to play programs need to do whatever they can to satisfy their clientele, right? Their customer base. They need those parents to keep forking over the fees, or else the business model crumbles. And as a result of that, they do whatever they can to make parents keep paying the fees, but also they make choices that will feed that focus on getting college scholarships because that's what they think parents need. And so they can make demands that are unreasonable just to raise their profile on this hierarchy. Because as you both know, there's all different levels that most parents don't understand. And the higher that you climb, the more the private coach or club can charge their families.
Yeah. I saw an ad pop up. I screenshot it and sent it to a friend of mine who works in the industry. Um, and it was a Florida travel league, like a big time, apparently it's a really big travel baseball program from like 8 on up, right? They even had rankings for like 8 and 9 year olds. Like just kind of, I mean, it sounds funny
Yeah.
to us. We kind of chuckle, but parents get involved in that.
Right. And
And
if
it
your
was,
kid appears on that ranking, you're going to double down and invest in more activities because you're thinking, my 8-year-old is number 37 on the national ranking. I've got to do whatever I can to make them number 25 or
Mhm.
12.
I never thought about that from a marketing perspective. They're just, you're all in at that point. They were promoting a spring baseball team for kids that were too elite for their high school program. And then,
Locally?
yeah, so
Wow.
they were kids that would come in, and he said, yes, that is becoming more and more. Kids at a certain level are quitting high school to play for the club.
Absolutely.
And it's happening, and it's news to me. Like I'm the first time hearing this. And
Same.
as I started talking to people, they're like, yeah, I know a club up north that does that for soccer. I know a volleyball program you can't play for the high school. Man, talk about disintegrating the fabric of culture in America. Start taking away high school sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know if I understand a culture that doesn't have playing with the kids you grew up with for your school.
Yeah. And to get back to this idea of our goal in providing parents with accurate information, I don't want people who listen to this to be thinking all coaches are evil and they're preying on kids,
Yes.
because we did find some amazing coaches. They're out there, and parents can find clubs that will nurture their young athletes in healthy ways. You just have to look for them. So, for example, one of the travel teams we followed for 2 years had this amazing, it was a girls soccer club, and they were ranked really highly in all those state rankings. And yet, the coach of that team, encouraged her soccer players to play multiple sports. If they miss practices, to go do track practice, or even, believe it or not, to be in a school play or something.
Mm,
They were completely fine with that, because what the coach told us was those young athletes came back to soccer with, you know, really excited to be there and ready to go all in. So there are coaches out there. There are lots of them, and I've
yeah.
talked to a lot of them
Yes.
who have read the book. You just got to look for
What does, in your mind, what does a healthy sport, and this is a loaded one,
them.
what does a healthy youth sports culture look like to you for kids?
Right. I would say I'm going to extend it out to just a healthy youth culture, and that's balance. The whole emphasis we place and our finding kind of highlights is the benefits of creating balance in kids' lives. And so that may look like playing on the Little League softball team for 3 months, and then going to soccer camp for 3 months, whatever. Or it may involve um, being involved in youth government for a couple days a week, being on the student council and being in the school play. And and also playing lacrosse or whatever. And it sounds simplistic, and I know it's harder to do than I'm making it sound, but it is possible. And we talked to lots of parents who did manage to do that, and those kids, most of them came out in really good places.
Okay.
And then if they ended up getting cut or injured or whatnot, they had all sorts of alternatives. Their life had a foundation that allowed them to weather those challenges.
It's a
Mhm.
great point, right?
It is, yeah.
If if you have an 8-year-old and you're all in on baseball, and then they get in ninth grade and they go to a really big school and they get cut from the team because there's 90 kids trying out for 20 spots and they get cut, what is the kid going to have?
Right.
Right. That's what we were talking about earlier with identity. I think that can occur not only at 18, but also at 12, 13, 10,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And some of the parents, getting back to the idea of kind of the politics of youth sports that we were talking about earlier, we had several parents talk about how they felt like they had so little control because a lot of these clubs are overseen or influenced by parents with clout, and they didn't always understand why their kid got cut or made it to a certain level. And when they had based their decisions on this dream of getting a college scholarship, it was devastating when a coach cut their kid or they didn't make it to the highest level, especially when it seemed like the coaches were making decisions that were based on things other than the kid's talent or dedication. So some of this is in the control of the parents, some of it is out of it, but I would say that that's a stronger reason to create balance in their lives, because some of it you don't have control over.
Mhm.
Being involved in you're an educator.
Right.
Right. I was really, when I went and kind of did some research, your commitment to just the field of education to me was impressive with stuff you've done in Japan and books you've written and um it said you were even still certified to teach elementary school, like you could go work in, I mean, so that 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 brings me the next question. We talk about parents, and parents should realize that they are in control, not the coach. Do you think, because of the rapid growth of this industry, that the actual skill of coaching, not just a dad who played when he was in high school and he watches, MLB all the time, the actual ability to coach, connect, teach skills, because there's a skill to being a coach, right?
Absolutely.
Do
That's a
you
really
think?
important point, because we're kind of presenting recreation leagues as this, wonderful, supportive environment that will meet all kids' needs. The reality is the level of coaching is probably not at the same level as some of these more serious travel clubs. Um, and some of the parents that we talked to told us that's why they switched their kids from a rec league to a travel club. And so we recognize that, because a lot of the travel teams are coached by college coaches who are doing this for supplemental income, or people who have gotten specialized licenses. So we're not discounting the value of that coaching. We're just saying, hold off. Don't go all in when your kid is 8 years old. Specialization may work for some kids, but wait until their bodies have matured, they're mentally fit, and they know what they want. And I'd say that's a takeaway we haven't really mentioned so far, is talk to the kids, ask them what they want, because a lot of parents kind of lose track of what the kids are all about, and it becomes more of a process of what the parent's ego needs.
Yeah, we've talked about this. We get lost. You talked about you being a parent. You get lost. Um, I remember this little spark in my brain. My kid loves soccer. Um, he's at 8 years old. He's pretty athletic. He's very physical. sometimes those kids win just because they're physical, they're very competitive. We've all seen the kids that go play sports and they're just not competitive. It's just not important to them. My kid's good because he's competitive and he's physical. And we were done with the soccer season and the coach goes, "Hey, we do a fall league." And my son goes, "Well, Daddy, in the fall, I want to play flag football." I'm not gonna lie, I had that little spark in my brain that said, "Well, if he plays fall rec league flag football, is he gonna fall behind in soccer?" I had that, right? I've worked in this
Same
industry
with
for
me. I
25
felt the
years.
same way. I think most parents do.
I mean,
But key to that, I think, is parent awareness of the implications of what they're doing. If you don't mind, it made me think of a little piece in the book where we interviewed from parents that I'd like to read.
yeah, great.
So, in one of the chapters of the book, we write, resisting pressure to succumb to that pressure can be an ongoing challenge, as the following exchange between two parents illustrate. So this is an interview I had with a married couple. The father says, "I think there's a problem and we're all part of the problem. We're all paying the fees and driving kids to these tournaments and worrying about winning games. We all have the right intentions, but we don't always follow through on them." And then the mother says, "I disagree. I don't think we all have the best intentions. I think a lot of parents want their kids to become professional athletes. It's disgusting. When I see my kid going through this, it makes me worry." So
Ooh.
it kind of highlights even this within this family. There's different perspectives, and one parent is really cognizant of how their decisions will affect the parents, their kids, and the other one not so much.
So even the two parents who are the ones driving and picking up the kid from school never had a conversation and said, "Hey, our kid's going to start youth sports. What do we want the end result to be when he's done and out of the home?
Right.
What do we want? What's the purpose of us doing this?"
Wouldn't you say too, when you're thinking about putting your kid into youth sports, that's not something you think about. You don't think about, and Josh, that's why I love the question of, if you knew your kid was not going to go to college to
Yeah.
play sports, would you do anything differently? I I was, and I don't have kids, so I don't have a dog in the fight quite yet, but I would think that most parents don't think about the outcome. They think about just what they're doing now. And so
Right.
then when they get into, 3 or 4 years of youth sports, that's when you start realizing things that are happening around you.
And the other thing we discovered is that parents, because it's hard to get accurate information, comprehensive information, what they tend to do is just do whatever their friends are doing.
Mhm.
So if a mother's closest friend signs them up for a year-round figure skating program, they think, "Oh, I'll just do that too." And then because of the changes we've discussed, they get sucked into it really quickly. It's hard to follow it, pivot and follow a different route.
Man, there's a lot of family dynamics to that too, because, you know, a mom and a dad might work till 5 and they're like, "Well, travel baseball starts at 5. What do I do?" "Oh, Billy's mom can drive them. So we'll just sign up for that because he can get there." Great. When you said that, sometimes when my kids signs up for a sport, the first thing I do is, how am I going to get them there and back? Like
Yeah.
you
You
think
don't
about
think
that, like,
about the depth of
yeah,
it.
who gets
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
That speaks to the busyness of it now, right?
Mhm.
If you have 3 kids that play sports,
And maybe all different
maybe
sports.
all different sports, 2 working parents, that's tough.
Right. And as you were pointing out, Gray, when most parents start this, they don't realize what they're signing up for. I
Yeah.
certainly didn't. And so when I signed my kid up to play T-ball or for the rec soccer league, I thought it would be a couple hours and they'd play with their friends and that would be it. And 2 years later, I was driving my son all over the Northeast to play in these tournaments, which wasn't on my radar at all. But that's what
Right.
everyone else was doing. So I went with the flow.
It's like I never understood why my parents were so glad I got my driver's license until now when I realized how busy they were taking me to practice 3 days a week.
Yeah.
We have a
Yeah.
friend, who works in baseball at a high level, and a college coach came to him one time and said, "I don't start recruiting a kid until he can drive and gets a girlfriend."
Mhm.
because a lot of kids are doing youth sports because that's the only thing that they can do to have an outlet.
Yeah.
Once they get a car, once they get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, all of a sudden maybe they don't
Life
love it as
changes.
much and they want the social side of things more.
Mhm.
And that's what usually happens when I've had multiple parents come to me and say, I want my kid to start working out. They're 13, they've committed to playing college sports. I'm like, they don't even know what that means, right? They would
Right.
commit to anything.
And
Yeah.
and they probably don't realize that only about 2% of all high school athletes are ever going to get a college athletic scholarship, because the percentage of athletes who are playing for these travel teams has gotten so huge. They just assume that they're, on the road to the scholarships. And on top of that, when really talented athletes do get scholarships, they're probably not going to be full scholarships. They're going to be partial scholarships. So when we look back at how much money the parents spend on all these sports activities, age 8 to 18, it's almost always a lot more than they get from a
Yeah,
scholarship.
it's they're net negative.
And I'll say too that like more of my friends that went into college playing a sport quit
Yeah,
than
1 in 4.
stayed with it the whole time.
Yeah,
Or they went to they went to a smaller school to play their sport and ended up hating that smaller school and transferred out, quit the sport and went to a different school and didn't play anything.
right,
So it's just, the odds are not in our favor of playing a college sport.
right.
One thing I hope this happens, and we've started to get more engagement from parents on our social media talking about this. Um, and I'm going to talk more about this book and things from this book. If a parent, if parents are watching this, what is one thing you hope every parent gets from reading this book?
It's hard to limit it to one. The first
Fine,
thing
we
is
can be
the
multiple
first thing
things.
is
Yeah, yeah,
talk to your kids and keep talking to them. So what they want when they're 8 is may not be what they want when they're 11 or 15. So keep those communication lines open and be open to the idea that your initial plan isn't the one that you're going to follow until they graduate from high school.
mm,
And then the second thing that I mentioned earlier is try. Well, I'm going to add two more things. One is to try and sign your son or daughter up for a variety of activities that engage them and challenge them in different ways. And the last thing is to be willing to let go of your ego and your goals, um,
mm.
and focus on what's best for the kid, whether they continue playing a sport or not. Because
Yeah.
the probability is they're not going to play a sport after they're 18 in any structured way. And so set them up to succeed in whatever they decide is most important to them.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a parent one time. It was a baseball parent. And the only reason I bring up baseball is that most of my career has been working with baseball kids. And the parent came up to me and said, hey, my son's 13 years old. And he told me instead of soccer, he wants to play, or instead of baseball, he wants to play soccer. The parent was kind of panicky.
Yeah.
Parent was a baseball coach. They played travel baseball. They invested all this time in baseball. And the parent goes, I just don't think we're going to let him do that because his future is baseball. And I want to know what he meant by the word future.
Like his next year.
Yeah, yeah.
No, and I'm smiling as I hear that story because I think that's great. That the kid has the self-awareness to decide, what I really want to do is this and not this. And another dimension of this is if a kid is good enough to get a scholarship to play D1 sports in college, they're going to get there. I mean, that takes such amazing talent that if at age 13 they start playing whatever it is, um, baseball or swimming, they're going to stand out. They're exceptional.
And I think
So,
too, the worry of like your child or even yourself losing the skill because you haven't practiced it in a couple of months is kind of beyond me, because I think if you jump into another sport, you only get better at the current sport that you're playing. Like I always told people, like lacrosse made me better at soccer, soccer made me better at basketball, basketball made me better at swimming. Like it's full circle for me. And we have such amazing, resilient muscle memory that when you start to kick a ball around again, it's going to come back.
That's
You know?
right on, and that's exactly what college coaches told us.
Yeah, I think that's
But
really interesting
parents
opinion.
have no idea what college coaches are thinking. They just
Yeah.
want them to show up at a tournament and recruit their kid.
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories from college, and one to your point, I've been in this long enough to tell people I know what it is. I don't know what that is until I see it. And the kids that go on to be exceptional and go to college, there's just something different about them at 14. They stand out. It's
Mhm.
not the lessons. It's not all this. It's just they were blessed. Everything they do, they're good at. One of the best baseball players I've worked with in recent years averaged 16 points a game as a freshman on the basketball team. Right? He probably would have picked up a tennis racket. One of the best athletes I know right now plays football, baseball, or football, basketball, soccer. And I tell people he would pick up a tennis racket and in 6 months probably be the best tennis. There's just something different.
Is
And
there, do you think
I
that's a
would add,
correlation? Like
Athleticism.
playing, yeah,
Oh, just
just
an
but
athlete.
playing multiple sports, do you
Just
think
an
that that's a
athlete.
huge correlation of your success?
Well, the fact that they can play so many sports later on because they're so good
Yeah.
means they're probably the better athlete.
and
Yeah.
part of that I think is being special in terms of athletic ability, and part of it is passion for your sport. And it's easy to lose that passion if you feel this pressure when you're 10 years old.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very true.
I don't want to paint everything as negative because, like you said, it's not. I want people to read the book and read about the great coaches, read about the great parents. There's so much good out there too. You don't want to
Absolutely.
throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what I originally loved about your book. The first chapter, I'm like, wow, this is going to be an open, objective look at coaching and parenting and kids, and we need to hear that. If there is something, if you're going to say, hey, it's not all doom and gloom, what's a positive trend you guys saw? What was something you saw and you're like, oh, that's a positive trend we're seeing?
I'm really glad you asked that question because people might go away out from this thinking sports is just going to cause so many problems for my kids. But there's a lot of things they do learn through sports, and parents really emphasize this to us, that they develop resilience, that they do develop a self-confidence, and especially girls and young women. We heard
Ooh,
from lots of parents saying that through sports they could become leaders, that they didn't have to compete against boys, that they were making important decisions. And then paired with that is the idea that kids who are playing sports, but I would add, it's true of most extracurricular activities, are not spending all their time playing computer games or getting involved in drugs. So there's
Mhm.
a lot of great things that come through sports. The challenge is finding the appropriate sport and supporting a kid so that they're ready to pivot and pursue what really makes them happy long term.
I love that you talked about the life skills. Um, when people are like, well, why should kids play sports? I'm like, well, it's the earliest they can mimic the skills they're going to have when they get older
Mhm.
with the less amount of consequence, right?
Mhm.
Um, Getting cut from the team is really in the end game not a huge consequence. At the time, it feels devastating for a kid. Um, you know, being late to practice all the time, forgetting having to sit for a half because, you know, maybe you were late to 3 practices in a row because, the accountability of there's accountability there, right? You learn
Mhm.
accountability, how to be on time, how to be a good teammate. The consequence for that bad behavior when you're 35
Yeah.
is not the
It's,
consequence for that bad behavior when you're 15.
yeah, it could be
Right.
life altering.
And I've heard kids come to me and say, hey, I had a kid who became a CFO at a very large hospital organization at like 31, 32, young. And I said, hey, man, I'm so proud to hear you got that job. It's awesome. You're doing great. He goes, Coach, I'll say this. The skills I learned that got me this job were the same skills I learned working out and playing sports.
Mhm.
It's still the same. Um, do you guys have any projects coming up? Is there anything you guys is it promoting the book right now, or are there any things that you guys have coming up? Because I'm going to I'm going to go back and look at some of the other things you've done.
Yeah.
Because I'm so intrigued by this book. Uh, Anything you got coming up in your future that you could share with us that you guys are doing or in sports at all or anything?
Well, this was a passion project for us. We did it because we really were motivated to help out parents. And so we've been focused on it for the last 6 or 7 years. We're going to continue to talk about it and give book talks and podcasts and things. My side project that I started last year has nothing to do with sports, but touches on some of the same themes. And that's I studied first year teachers during their initial year in the career. So I followed a group of first year teachers and interviewed them every month just to see what it's like to be a new teacher these days, because we're talking about sports pressures, but teachers are experiencing a whole set of equally powerful pressures that create all sorts of
Well,
issues.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of coaches that are also teachers, right?
Mhm.
And being a new teacher, I love. I was really inspired by your dedication to education, right?
Mhm.
And that was really something. If they could, in just a few questions,
Yep.
um, do you remember an influential coach growing up?
Yeah, I do. But for me, this kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier. I played so many different sports and none all year round. So I could list 7 or 8 coaches because I usually worked with one coach for 3 months and then another for 3 months and another for 3 months. And I changed sports. So I think most of my coaches were really inspiring because the focus was on supporting athletes and not getting them scholarships. As you
That's
mentioned,
awesome.
when I was in high school, if you were on a travel team, that meant you were really exceptional. Like, you were going to make it big time. Most of us were playing for our high school teams just to have fun and compete. And so I had lots of good coaches, but I can't identify a single one. I can identify teachers that really inspired me.
Great. Yeah, same
And
thing.
those are the teachers, I had a high school English teacher who um, challenged me, but also recognized that I was doing all sorts of stuff and wanted to help me succeed in whatever I was going to do. And the emphasis was on cognitive development, also on my social development. And I think that's true of almost any inspiring leader who works with kids.
It's always the high school English teacher. I'm telling I don't know a single person, and mine's my high school English teacher too. I don't know a single person that won't say my high school English teacher.
Yeah. No,
They're
I agree.
tough.
Some of the people at our school that kids talk about are the English teacher. I think because
Yes. They're
the
just tough.
well, the idea of reading to comprehend is such a skill. To be
Hmm.
able to read and comprehend and
And
communicate,
right. Yeah.
write and communicate.
Yeah.
I would also add that I'm really inspired by former students from Vassar who are teachers now, because most of them have managed to, maintain that sense that it's really important to support kids and help them develop a passion and not just focus on test scores or getting into a certain college. And they inspire me every day.
Yeah,
Love
that's a
that.
whole big subject I bet you could teach on is the desire for that perfect SAT, that perfect 4.0.
Hmm.
Is that really learning? Do we have are we killing the desire to learn by just focusing on the grades, right? And are we curious or do we just want the high grade, right? And
Which is directly relevant to the topic of youth sports, I would say.
yeah,
Yeah.
the conversations I've had with kids to have exceptional grades, I would say is very correlating to the parents that push the kids to succeed at the highest level in sports.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming. Mostly, I appreciate you writing the book,
Thank you.
and I appreciate you responding and coming on.
My pleasure.
I really wanted this to be of value for parents. If anything, they watch our podcast, they meet you. If anything, go buy the book, read the book, share it with your friends, share it with your coaches. Um,
That's the biggest thing I think we're looking for out of this series, though, is just to open the door to conversation, to let parents, kids, coaches know that, there's ways that you can do this. It's not going to sacrifice the potential of your kid and the potential of your family.
That's so nice to hear because, as I mentioned, our goal throughout this process has just been supporting parents and helping them understand what's gonna help their kids.
Yeah.
Yes. I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll be talking more. We'll be chatting more for sure. Thank you,
Yeah.
Chris.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
With all due respect.